Hello, strangers. It's a new year, and I'm so happy to see you here again. Today's story is number 210.
For context, I'm a guy. I was 22 and a specialist in the army when this whole thing went down. I was stationed on a multi-branch base, meaning you'd see any of the branches, if not all of them, any given day. We did the usual jokes and stuff, painted the Navy's big anchor thing pink, stuff like that. Air Force was a bunch of kleptos, but they usually got yelled at enough to return stuff. For the most part, though, we got along okay. In some cases, better than okay. In one instance, one of our sister services decided to decamp from a building. In doing so, they offered it up to us. Word in the barracks was the building was run through with black mold. Or asbestos. I forget which. Not that it mattered. Could have been airborne MRSA, and we still would have taken it off their hands. When our acquisition of said building was announced, though, it came with some strings attached. Namely, that until we'd fully moved in, the building would need to be manned 24/7. We didn't ask why, and they weren't of a mind to explain their reasoning to us. That's how I came to find myself taking a string of midnight watches with my sidearm, a lantern, and a 21-year-old private I'll call Briggs. Oh, did I mention the power was cut to the building? Because it was. Be that for the official handover, or just our sister service messing with us, the price of getting a free building was one we were set to pay. It was fall going on winter, so the lack of HVAC wasn't such a big deal. During the day, the sun made it into the lobby area decently through the front windows. But I didn't work the day shift. During our overnight watch, the building was pitch black. They gave us a lantern each and told us to carry flashlights to compensate. A bit of context. The age gap between me and Briggs was negligible, but given time in and rank, E4 Mafia for life, boys, I was the designated adult and in charge of myself and Briggs on these shifts. I started out taking it pretty seriously. Us getting a new building sans having to deal with space wars or the red tape involved with constructing a new building on post meant the building, and potentially whoever was guarding it, were on the radar. But after the first couple of weeks, we figured out that top brass weren't sticking around after hours to check on us. So we got a little lax. What do you expect? 12 hours is 12 hours, and when the other branch left their building, they left behind an unholy amount of old office furniture, including some ancient wheelie chairs. Sending them back and forth down the hallway like some mutant version of bowling, well, it kept us from falling asleep. We took turns sending the chairs flying down the hallway, seeing who could launch it the farthest. It was not as much fun retrieving the thing from that pitch-black mouth, but it beat standing at parade rest for visitors who, we were sure, weren't coming on our watch. On one of Briggs's turns down the hall to retrieve the chair, he didn't come back straight away. I heard his footsteps down the hall, steady and growing dim and echoey the farther down he walked. But then, nothing. No returning footsteps, no sound of the chair squealing as he drug it back. The silence where I expected sound was unsettling. I finally got up and started towards the hall, intent on yelling at him to come back. I was already assuming the worst, that he had taken my latitude in chair bowling as permission to hang back there and rack out on duty. Looking back, I wish he had. But no, as I started towards the hallway, I heard him finally start coming back. Only, it wasn't the steady walking sound I'd heard or expected. He was running. When he reached me, his eyes were wide. He told me he'd heard voices. Not a voice. Voices coming from deeper and further in the building. I, of course, asked him if he was messing around, even as I felt my stomach do a little flop. If this was a trick, I was going to let him have it. But instead of him coming clean, his face remained frozen, like his eyes were just too wide. If he was bluffing, he was an expert at it. He insisted no, he wasn't joking at all. He'd heard voices, a mix of them, men and women. My mind raced. How the hell could they must have snuck in on someone else's shift. I was already mentally berating the shift before us for letting anyone past. Even if we'd been digging around with office furniture on ours, well, we were the night crew. Surely day crew should have their crap together, what with the threat of top brass coming by at any minute to gawk at their newest acquisition. Briggs was looking at me, wild-eyed and expectant. And of course he was. I was in charge. I tried to think of something intelligent to ask him. Finally, I asked if the voices had been speaking English. He frowned, shaking his head. He didn't know. When pressed, he told me he'd heard voices, the sound up and down, conversation-alike, but couldn't make out a single distinct word. Great, I thought to myself. That was not great news. I realized we had to go check it out. I mean, it was what we were there to do, right? I didn't like it, and from his face, Briggs sure as hell didn't like it either. I grabbed my flashlight, and with my sidearm heavy against my leg, I began walking down the hallway. At once, Briggs scared the hell out of me by following. I'd assumed he'd stay behind, continue watching the front. But as I looked back down the black hole of a hallway before me, I decided it was in the best interest of the United States Army to protect its assets, namely me, and have him cover the rear. We walked down the hallway. He was still breathing heavy, kind of a mouth breath, and while it was nice to not be going it alone, the sound of him near panting behind me was giving me the creeps. As we walked, I'd shine my flashlight into each office off the main hallway, looking for movement. Briggs would cover with his drawn weapon. But nothing was in there. Just more busted, dusty office furniture. Each room cleared should have relieved me, but instead, I just felt the tension was building, winding up for that sting of jump scare music every late-night horror movie had prepared me for. At the end of the hallway, we happened across something strange. Unlike the other office doors, the last door on the right was thick metal with a combo lock on the outside. Loads of plastic sleeves were stuck to the front of it, where I assumed some sort of log or checkout sheet had previously hung. I looked at Briggs. He asked me why the door would look like that. I guessed it had been their armory, a thought that did not provide me relief. Given the crap job they'd done cleaning out the other offices, the likelihood that they'd left behind weapons. Well, I'd hate to think any military branch would be so careless, even as I acknowledged that it was my own branch that had apparently let trespassers wander right past them into this building in the first place. The door was hanging open, just a sliver of deepest black between the metal door and the jamb. I had a moment of panic when I wedged my fingers in, certain that the door would actuate and snap shut, taking my fingers with it. But once I got the thing open wide enough, I shoved the tip of my boot in and used it to push it open further. What yawned opened beyond that door was another hallway, completely devoid of light, not so much as a window to let in a smear of moonlight from outside. Briggs asked me if we had to go in. Hell no, I thought. But then I heard a sound, not a voice, but something metal, dropping. There was a moment of calm until I felt Briggs jump beside me, sort of a delayed response. I looked back at him, then back down the black hole hallway, expecting movement, but I saw nothing. My flashlight seemed to be unable to penetrate beyond a few feet in front of us. "Yeah," I said. "We have to go in." Sucks being the idiot in charge sometimes. Looking back to Briggs and giving him a nod with a lot more confidence than I felt, I made sure he was ready, and then I reached out and pulled the heavy metal door towards me. It ended up taking both hands, opening with a grinding sound. Immediately, swirls of dust rose up, making my eyes water. I heard Briggs cough beside me. With the door open, I resumed panning with my flashlight. Nothing. No movement. No creepy long face peeking out from around a door frame. It was just a hallway, off of which there appeared to be a few doorways. Wherever our flashlights were was hazy gray at best. Everything else was black. I swear to God, I was listening so hard for voices or anything, I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. We started walking down the hall, with the intent to clear the area until we found wherever that sound had come from. The first two offices were a bust. Nothing but abandoned desks and broken modular cubes. Tension was just building. Briggs wasn't helping. Every 5 seconds he was gasping or whirling around. I was really starting to second guess asking him to come along, or letting him have a sidearm when he was this jumpy. The third or fourth time he flagged me, the pressure finally had me snap. "Briggs, knock it off. I don't know what's worse, getting taken down by a ghost or friendly fire." He did as I asked, but looked at me like a kicked dog. "Dude, this was your idea to come down here. We should go back." I just shook my head. I was 6 years into my enlistment, Briggs far less. There was sort of this implied older brother feel to it. I tried to keep that in my head as I motioned for us to move on, back down the hallway, into the next room. But before we could reach the door from down the hallway, I suddenly heard it. A burst of voices. I thought Briggs was going to pass out. He did this sort of stomp and jump away from the door. I froze, not on purpose, but just because I couldn't move. It was a blend of voices, far more than 2 or 3. It sounded like a crowd, and like Briggs had said, I couldn't make out a single word they were saying. It was definitely human voices, and there was definitely the cadence of human speech, but it was muffled, like they were all talking through COVID masks or something. Further, I thought I heard a clanking or a clinking, a mechanical sound maybe. But the most unsettling was that I saw no light. Nothing. Was it possible that there was a crowd of people somewhere deep in this building, holed up, maybe vagrants, that had snuck in looking for a place to stay? The winters here are brutal. But wouldn't there be light? Could it be that a crowd of what sounded like 10 or 20 people would just be sitting in the dark? It was finally Briggs beside me, insisting, "We gotta go, man, we gotta go," that seemed to break me out of my freeze. I turned to him and I said, "Stay here. Watch the hallway and make sure nothing comes behind me." It was a lot braver than I wanted to be, but that military age thing works both ways. I was the senior. I needed to go. And so, with dread and the dust in the air giving my mouth the most foul, dead air taste, I eased towards the doorway. I drew, got ready, and stepped into the hallway. Nothing. There was no one there. The cadence of the voices hadn't changed. They didn't hear my footsteps. Good, I think. I held my breath, and I started to step, slowly, softly, down the worn carpet towards the source of the noise. It was getting louder, but no more clear, still muffled, and that clanking was more like a clinking. Glass, maybe. I again thought of my first hypothesis of vagrants. Maybe they were drinking. It kind of sounded like beer, but the second I took that step, the second I had that thought, the voices cut out again, all at once, like a conductor shushing an orchestra. What was going on? I was frozen, sure that they'd heard me, waiting for the sensation of something rushing out of me from the dark. I'd had my flashlight trained on the ground. Now, I decided, I just couldn't take the tension anymore. I raised it to eye level, and I called out, "Halt! Identify yourselves!" My voice may or may not have cracked on that last. Nothing. There was nothing in response. Not so much as a pin drop. I thought back to Briggs's paranoia. I didn't want to believe I was walking into a horror movie, even as I, like a protagonist in a horror movie, walked directly towards the danger. But what else could I do? I had to know. What was this? At the very end of the hallway was what looked like a utility closet. It was hard to tell with the echoes in that hallway. It was so shut in and suffocating, but I was pretty sure the sound had come from down here. And this was the only door. I felt sweat running off my temples as I readied myself again. I held my flashlight at eye level, reached out, put my hand on the knob, started to turn it. From behind it came the voices again, a burst of them, louder than before, more of them than before. Panic seized me. I didn't know what to do. It startled me so much. I did the ultimate no-no. I discharged around into the carpet. From behind me, I could hear Briggs hollering, "Mason! Mason!" And all that put on bravery, all that I'm the senior here. Screw this. I turned tail and I ran. We didn't stop running. Not once down that hallway, not once past the vault door, not until we got back to the safety of our lanterns. Once there, we stood, panting, staring at each other, faces white like cottage cheese. Briggs was demanding I tell him, what did I see? What did I shoot? Did I get him? And I was trying to find a way to tactfully say that my only kill count at this point was an old moth-eaten carpet. But now we were faced with a problem. Ammo is very carefully controlled in the army. I'd discharged a round. Now we'd have to answer for it. Morning came too soon. I was hoping it would just be a couple of specialists, somebody low enough ranking that we could walk away. maybe figure out what to do. No such luck. The person relieving us that morning was none other than Staff Sergeant Harper. Staff Sergeant Harper was a monster. All 5'0" of him. And for anybody who thinks that size made him less of a threat, you've clearly never met an under 5'5" E6. Likely he was that short to stay as close to home, hell, as he could. He was no one to mess with, and it was to this man that I had to look in the eye and explain that one of his specialists had decided to discharge a firearm and then turn tail and run. I was expecting an ass-chewing of legendary proportions, and sure enough, I saw the telltale rosy tint of bloodshot working its way into the sclera of his eyes. But before I could fully fall on my sword and accept my punishment, Briggs, next to me, interjected, telling him, "Sergeant, no, it's my fault. I'm the one that heard the voices, see?" I turned to Briggs. He was looking at me, hopeful that he'd saved me somehow, brave. And here I was thinking, you just told a sergeant that you're hearing voices. This is not the Hail Mary you think it is. But Staff Sergeant Harper surprised me. He looked at Briggs, then to me. Voices? Tell me about these voices. So he did, describing them as a crowd that seemed to come out of nowhere. Muddled, conversational, and that weird clinking. Staff Sergeant Harper looked at us both, then said, "You boys come with me." And he walked past us, down the hallway. We had no choice but to follow. It was still dark as pitch in there, still no light from outside, but the fear I'd had the night before was gone. There was nothing scarier than Staff Sergeant Harper in that vault. Of that I was damn sure. We walked past the vault door, past all the rooms we'd cleared, and finally to the room that I had mistaken as a utility closet at the very end of the hall. He paused there, asking Briggs to shine his light on the carpet until he could find the bullet hole. Sure enough, that ratty burgundy carpet had a fresh divot. He looked at this for a moment, then back at me. "Just making sure you had it holstered, son." I felt the blush of humiliation across my face, but I couldn't say anything. He turned back to the door and told us that he knew, as neither of us had clearances, we would have no idea about the procedures of a vault, the protections of it. But he described it as a place where it was safe for folks to talk secrets, and each military branch had their own touches, and as it happened, the Navy did something different, and with this, he swung the door open. It took everything in me not to scream as the largest brown rat came scampering out at us. The staff sergeant merely watched it go, then turned back and motioned to the closet. He told us the Navy employed a sort of baffle of sound, white noise that they played through the walls, just to make sure that human voices on the inside were properly muddled and couldn't be picked up on the outside. The term Staff Sergeant Harper used was sound masking. He took his own flashlight and shone it at where the rat had been, showing us exposed wires. He turned to us and nodded, chalking it up to the wires maybe crossing when a rat startled at the sound of one of us. And when the wires touched, the old sound system came alive. All I could do was nod. I still didn't know how much trouble I was going to be in. Appearing too conciliatory could be the wrong move, especially with someone like Staff Sergeant Harper. But as he turned and walked past us back down the hallway, he spoke low over his shoulder, saying, "Let's just chalk that up to a training event, shall we?" And that was it. I don't know what relieved me more. The fact that we finally knew where that sound had come from, a rational reason, something we could hold on to, or the fact that I survived Staff Sergeant Harper. Briggs, though, he still seemed distracted by something. We didn't pull guard duty again for a couple of days, and when we did, it was day shift. As we sat, I kept watching him nervously look back down the hall, until I finally asked him, "Hey, what's going on? You afraid you're going to hear the voices again?" Briggs took one look down the hallway, then back at me. "Remember Staff Sergeant Harper saying, that the wires must have touched?" "Yeah," I nodded, already feeling a little bit of that older brother condescension at my younger, slower brother. At least until Briggs looked me dead in the eye and said, "Wires touching shouldn't matter. Power's off in the building, remember?" I had nothing to say to that, and all that big brother smartass was gone. That shift and every other shift, we played cards, we marked the time, we did not dick around with the office furniture, and we did not speak of what really happened behind that door.
I don't know about you guys. The real horror story is probably all the black mold and asbestos they disturbed while they were walking down that hallway. Still, he's right. You do know what you sign up for. Like, comment, subscribe, notify, or none at all. I'm just so happy you're here. Until next time, take care, strangers.